Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich and I get you ready for the resumption of Big Ten play for Indiana. That is on Saturday at Maryland by breaking down the Big Ten into tiers, talking about each team, where they kind of stack up based on what they've done, but also how we project them moving forward and where Indiana stacks up in there. And then what Indiana needs to do, how Indiana needs to improve over how they've played over the last few games to make sure that they're ready for what is certainly going to be a rough, rugged Big Ten season. But we talk about all of that, breaking down the Big Ten this week on Podcast on the Brink. Before we get to that, quick thought about tickets. Do you ever feel like ticketing websites make getting to the event difficult on purpose? It's like they're so big, they feel like they can get away with not caring about the customer experience. What does it matter if their site's annoying, doesn't have the events you want? Hello, status quo. The real question is, how easy could it be if those ticketing sites actually cared? Well, SeatGeek actually cares. Now, why is SeatGeek better than the rest? Well, if you want to look for evidence, just take a quick look at the App Store, which shows over 50,000 five-star reviews. Talk about customer satisfaction. And the reason why SeatGeek has so many satisfied customers is because they deliver a better process. SeatGeek pulls together millions of tickets from all over the web. They rate each deal on a scale of 1 to 10, and they put them all on an interactive seat map. Green dots are good deals, red dots are overpriced, and every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets with confidence. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It's what I use for concert tickets, live event tickets, sports tickets. If you're going to go to any IU basketball games this year, road or home, they've got listings there for all of them and good prices available, so go check them out. And when you do, SeatGeek will give you $10 off your first purchase. All you need to do is use our promo code. It's Brink, B-R-I-N-K. So download the SeatGeek app, use that promo code BRINK today to get $10 off your first purchase. All right, now here's our conversation about the Big Ten. All right, Alex. Well, we have had a night to sleep on. Indiana's disappointing loss last night in the Gator Bowl, and it is time now to fully turn our attention to basketball, which I guess we always do on this show. But, I'm sure a lot of the people out there listening are, still have a little bit of a football hangover from that disappointing loss. But, hey, quickly, Saturday, Big Ten play resumes for this Indiana basketball team that currently sits at 11-2 overall, 1-1 in the conference with a difficult trip to Maryland. The Big Ten schedule ramps up quickly, as we have discussed, and so thought this week we would kind of, instead of just diving in and talking about Indiana, let's talk about the Big Ten Conference as a whole as kind of a primer for what is to come over these next 18 games. How does that sound?
Yeah, it sounds terrific. I do want to say one thing about Indiana specifically, just kind of coming out of that Arkansas game. We haven't had a chance to talk since then, but I think there's kind of two competing ways to look at Indiana's season so far. And I think after the Arkansas game, we saw more of the alarmist mentality just based on kind of how they lost that game. People are worried now about how Big Ten play is going to unfold. I guess that would be your glass half empty look. I think the glass half full look is, I think in the preseason, if you would have told everybody that Indiana would be sitting at 11-2 going to Maryland, I think most people probably would have taken that based on preseason expectations. It's just, the most recent memory of this team that people have fresh in their minds is, seeing them only score 3 points in the last 8 minutes against Arkansas. And so people have, had some panic, and that's totally justified. But I would also say that there's a lot of season left, and there's going to be plenty of more twists and turns to come. So let's just wait to cast final judgment on this team until we have a kind of a more complete body of work. And we all know that January could be really rough, but I still think there's a pretty good chance for this Indiana team to get back to the tournament. And I think that's all anybody that follows the team, supports this program is focused on right now. Rather than you got to move forward and try to get some positive momentum back, and they have a chance to do that beginning Saturday at Maryland.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely agree that most everybody would have taken 11-2, especially when 3 of those victories are in those 4 non-conference games that we knew Indiana would have to do a good job in, and 2 of them came away from home, against UConn and Notre Dame. So that is all good. Now I think the context would matter. Like if you told me Indiana would be 11-2, but defensively, we'd be 59th in KenPom, and some of the other issues that have come with it, that might have made me pause a little bit. So all that stuff is kind of worked in there. But, look, you're 11-2. You've got those 11 wins in the bank, and now you got to move forward here in Big Ten play. And, look, whether certain guys are injured, not playing very well right now, you're, struggling to get cohesion on the defensive end, like all these things that, are still kind of happening and need to get worked out. The bottom line is now they've got to get worked out and get worked out quickly, because the schedule is going to get tough, and that starts on Saturday. So let's look at the Big Ten as a whole, and let's kind of break it into tiers. And you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I was originally under the impression that we were going to do 4 tiers. You are throwing a last-minute curveball and saying that there are now 5 tiers in the Big Ten. Do you want to explain yourself?
Well, I had to add a tier for Northwestern.
They have their own tier, huh?
To occupy for itself. Normally, I would have 4 tiers, but I do have, and we don't have to spend much time on this, I have the hopeless tier, and that is currently occupied by Northwestern, because based on their performance this season. And one thing I did when I did these Big Ten power rankings, we don't have a ton of Big Ten only data to go by. So I when I did my Big Ten power rankings, I just kind of looked at who everyone's played so far, who they've beaten, and who they've lost to. And the thing that stands out to me about Northwestern is 3 home losses to Merrimack, Radford, and most recently Hartford, which is sub 300 in KenPom. So is
that bad?
To me, that puts them below Nebraska, even though they're ranked higher in KenPom than Nebraska. Nebraska, to me, has shown at least that they are capable of beating a decent team. They beat Purdue at home. Northwestern beat Providence at home, which doesn't really excite me at all. So I gave Northwestern their own tier. So we don't have to spend any more time on Northwestern, but they're in the bottom tier for me. So
okay,
we can now move on to the other 4 tiers.
Okay, so let's start at the top, which seems pretty clear. And did you call your top contenders? Is that what we're going with here?
Yes.
So these are the teams that we think are, obviously most likely to really compete for the Big Ten title. To me, there are 2 of them, Michigan State and Ohio State, and I'm not comfortable enough with any of the other teams to put them in there. Is that?
I agree. Okay. I had those 2 teams at the top. And actually, I think right now a lot of people probably feel like Ohio State's the favorite, but I'm kind of moving off of them and trending more towards Michigan State based on what I've seen recently. And I know Josh Langford's out for the year, but I just think that when it comes to the meat of this Big Ten season, the 2 most important things to me are coaching and point guard play. And I think Michigan State is the best in both of those areas. They have the best coach in the league, in my opinion, in Tom Izzo, and they have not only the best point guard, they have the best player in the league in Cassius Winston. And so they're 3-0 so far in the league. They're the only team without a loss in the conference. They just crushed Illinois yesterday, and I feel really good about where they're going. Now, their ceiling may not be as high as we originally thought. They were preseason number 1. They really only had one place to go, and that was down. And they did take some losses early in the year that were, alarming. But I think recently they've been a lot better. And, if I was betting right now on who would win the league, I would take Michigan State.
And they've obviously dealt with some issues this year. The tragedy with Cassius Winston's brother and losing Josh Langford. And I think, when you listen, hopefully folks listen to the Moving Screen Pod. That's a podcast that we've recommended here a lot with our friends of the show, Brendan Quinn and Dylan Burkhart. And you hear Brendan talk about it. He's almost like, I'm kind of throwing out the first month of the season because it was so strange and they dealt with a lot of stuff. And now they're getting going. To be fair, they are 3-0 in Big Ten play, but those 3 wins are home against Rutgers, at Northwestern, and home against Illinois. So they don't really have like an impressive Big Ten win yet, But I mean, they won on the road, so I guess that's as impressive as any Big Ten win that there is when you can win on the road, even if it's against your hopeless Northwestern Wildcats. But I agree. Ohio State has played the best from start until now overall, although they obviously took a loss recently. But I think Michigan State is kind of rounding into form, and anybody who counts a Tom Izzo team out after a rough November or early December, you're usually going to find that that's not a smart thing to do. So I look at those two teams. To me, they have the best combination of playing the best, talent, just when you look at it on paper, obviously coaching, and just fewer questions than a lot of the other teams that we're going to get to. And you could probably make a case for a Maryland. You could talk about Michigan, some of those teams, and we'll get to them in a second with why we don't think that they're contenders. But yeah, to me, Michigan State and Ohio State pretty clearly the favorites, and it'll be fun to see them duke it out, because I think if one of them is going to separate from the other, it would be Michigan State separating from Ohio State. I think they have the higher ceiling, but I think Ohio State's proven that they're going to be in it for the long haul. So I expect it to be a pretty good two-team race down to the end between those two.
I agree with all that. How many teams did you have in your next tier?
So the next tier, what are we calling this tier now officially?
I called it next in line.
Next in line. So these are teams that we don't think are going to compete, but are going to be pretty consistent. That next step down.
Compete for the Big Ten title, right?
Yeah. Not compete for the Big Ten title, but these are teams that are locks for the NCAA tournament. And that's how I would consider them.
Based on how they've played so far.
Right, based on how they've played so far.
Right.
But they have enough question marks that, it wouldn't shock me if they fall into the tier below. I think they have enough talent that they could potentially rise above, but I'm not really seeing it. But to me, those teams are Maryland, Michigan, and honestly, those are the only two teams that I'm comfortable enough putting in there. I mean, as you can see, I think there's going to be a lot of jumble in the middle. But those are the two teams to me that I put in there. And the reason why I don't put them any higher than that is I don't trust Maryland's coaching, and I don't trust their depth, although they have as much high-end talent as most everybody else. And with Michigan, they've got a lot of proven players like Xavier Simpson, John Teskey. They've obviously proven that they can win big games, but they got a brand new coach who's going to be going through the Big Ten for the first time. And so I think, having that experience is going to help them. So I think they have a high floor, but I don't think they can get up to contender status. And then I have a whole bunch of questions about a lot of teams after that.
Yeah, I had both of those teams in my next in line tier, but I also had two other teams, which may surprise you. I had Iowa.
Don't say Iowa.
I had Iowa right now, and I also had Penn State. And that's based on...
I don't trust either one of those teams, though, because I thought about them, but I couldn't in good faith actually put them up there.
Yeah, well, here's what I'll say about Iowa. Okay, they've lost 3 games. They lost at Michigan. They lost to San Diego State, which is a really good team on a neutral court. And they lost at home to DePaul, which was a bad loss. And I think everyone at the beginning of the season saw that and said, this team is in trouble. They're not going to be very good. But you look at their wins. They've beaten, to me, 5 pretty solid teams. They've beaten Texas Tech. Syracuse is decent on the road. I mean, we've seen how hard it is to win on the road. They beat Minnesota, Iowa State on the road, and Cincinnati on a neutral court. The reason I'll say that right now I have them above, and I'm not saying they're going to finish in this tier, but their offense is 4th in the country, which is
okay. Here's the thing.
Really impressive to me.
I'm trying to project forward, because I think if you're talking about based on what they've earned, then you make a good argument for Iowa. However, when I project them forward, we've seen this before from Iowa. They've had great starts to the year and been in January and been in the top 10, and they fade because they don't defend, and for whatever reason, Iowa teams just can't seem to sustain themselves under Fran McCaffrey. So I just have a feeling that they're going to be right down with all the rest of us, in that big mushy middle of the Big Ten. I don't trust them, and it's the same thing with Penn State. Now, am I maybe placing too much weight on past performance? Maybe these individual teams might be better, but I don't have that faith in those two teams that they're, once we get into the heat of the Big Ten play, game in, game out, that they're going to win enough games to clearly be a tier above the rest of the teams that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, but wouldn't you also maybe put at this point Maryland and Michigan, though, in that category of having significant questions, because Michigan's without Isaiah Livers. We don't know how long he's going to be out. They also have a coach who was in his first year in the Big Ten. Now, I know he's had success to this point, and I know he had an impressive run in the battle for Atlantis, which, really, put Michigan kind of back on the national map. But we don't know how they're going to adjust to not having Livers for the long term. And with Maryland, we've seen the same thing with Mark Turgeon teams that we've seen with Fran McCaffrey teams at Iowa.
Yes.
Maybe not to the same extent, but Mark Turgeon just had 2 players leave his program. They were freshmen. That hurts his front court depth. I was just kind of reading some stuff from afar about Maryland as I was previewing the Indiana game this weekend. It just doesn't seem like they're actually thrilled with the job he's done there. It just kind of feels
nor
like...
should they be.
Right. So they feel like, to me, they have a chance to kind of really, I don't want to say totally implode, but, I don't necessarily trust them. So, that's the thing. The reason I'm comfortable putting Iowa and Penn State kind of in that same grouping right now is because I kind of feel like all 4 teams, if they reach their potential, they're locks for the tournament. And I can't believe I'm saying that about Penn State, but based on what I've seen so far, they've been a really good team. I mean, they're 24th in KenPom. They've been, they beat Maryland at home, but I feel like all 4 of those teams have significant question marks. And while it's fair maybe to put Maryland and Michigan a slot ahead of Iowa and Penn State,
are we adding sub tiers?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time differentiating all those 4 teams right now. Now, I do feel like the next tier there's kind of a line to draw through, but
here's my reply to that, because you bring up interesting points. To me, the questions about Michigan and Maryland are what keep them from being able to go up to the next tier. They have questions, undoubtedly. The ones that you just highlighted, I mentioned them before. But here's what they also have: Xavier Simpson and Anthony Cowan, experienced point guards, and they have John Teske and Jalen Smith. So, to me, those kind of 2-man combos are better than what anybody else is bringing to the table, and that just raises their floor. Like you said, if all 4 of these teams reach their potential, they're going to be locks for the tournament. I think Michigan and Maryland can actually underachieve and still be a lock for the tournament, even if they kind of fade a little bit. Just because I think those players, we know how Big Ten basketball works. I'm not the biggest fan of Anthony Cowan, but he's a senior point guard that has, been through a lot of stuff. And, same with Xavier Simpson. So that to me is the difference between those 2 teams. Iowa who's even playing point guard for them right now? Bohannon is out, and, Penn State, their guard play is probably, really underrated, and maybe I'm underrating those guys, but I just haven't built in the trust with them yet. So it's just that. So that to me is where I'm coming from. But I won't be shocked if Iowa or Penn State finish up there, but I just don't have the confidence in it yet. So before we get to the next tier, and I'm hoping this is the tier that Indiana is going to come into, I have a question for you. Our sponsor, Home Field Apparel, we love Home Field Apparel. They obviously got a lot of attention during the football season for the 9 Windiana shirt that they put out before the season started. And up until about 5 minutes left in that game last night, it looked like it was going to be the greatest called shot in apparel history. What over-under Home Field Apparel being able to repurpose 9 Windiana for the basketball team in Big Ten play? Over under 9 Big Ten wins for Indiana in conference play this year.
Oh, I actually think they're going to win 9, so that's hard for me to... Wow.
Would that be the most ironic and disappointing outcome, that they can repurpose that shirt for the basketball season?
It's a new year. It's a new year. I'm optimistic, so I'm going to go over.
Okay, over. I like it. Well, definitely you should also go over to homefieldapparel.com. Check out all of their Indiana gear. The 9 Windiana shirt, of course, is there, but they've got the Bison hoodie. I'll tell you what I got this Christmas. I hadn't gotten one of their crew neck sweaters. I'd always gotten the hoodies. The crew neck sweater is unbelievably comfortable. I got the one with the little Hoosiers shoes logo. I absolutely love it. It runs a little big, though, so you might want to get like one lower size than what you think you need, because the one I got was a little bit too big, but so comfortable. Everything that they have there is incredibly comfortable. It's comfortable even after you wash it. And when you use the promo code BRINK, BRINK, you will get 20% off of your first order, off of any of the gear that they have there. So go to homefieldapparel.com, check out all the football shirts they put out this year, check out all the other vintage logos that they have, and get whatever you need to get through this winter. It's obviously going to be a cold winter, but we hope that that Indiana is able to warm it up some with some good play on the court. So go to homefieldapparel.com, promo code BRINK, get your gear there. Okay, so that leads us in now to this discussion of the next year. What are you calling the third tier of Big Ten teams?
The middle is what I've called it, the middle. But actually extends. It extends from about my grouping has 5 teams. How many do you have?
Well, I was not prepared for all these different tiers that we had here, so I'm gonna let you go first with this one. I want to see who you have.
In no particular order in this grouping, I have Purdue, Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin.
Okay, and so I have Iowa and Penn State here.
In here, okay.
Yeah, I dropped them down here, and then I definitely place Purdue in this tier. Again, they've obviously taken on some losses, but I think that they're going to be. I think they'll get better as the season goes along. Just kind of trust in Matt Painter. I definitely put Indiana in this tier as well. I have to say, I've really struggled with Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois to know what to make of those teams. I will say that I feel better about Indiana than all 3 of those teams. I know Wisconsin absolutely trounced us, but I feel over the course of a season. What I would say is I would probably put Wisconsin up, and then I would not include Minnesota and Illinois in that tier. And that can come back to bite me. It's the thin margin, but I just don't trust those teams.
I have Illinois as kind of my last team if I'm making a cutoff in that tier. I think they're 9-5 now. They've got really one top 100 win. It was over Michigan at home. So I don't love what they've done to this point, and I don't have confidence that they're going to even make the tournament. But I think they have at least the talent to be a dangerous team and maybe get things together here as conference play rolls around. Wisconsin is interesting because they have some decent wins, and I feel like their style of play is going to keep them competitive in a lot of situations. They're just so, they're kind of a unicorn in terms of the Big Ten and having to prepare for a team like that. And, they did go to Tennessee recently and got a big win there. Although I don't know how good of a Tennessee team that was. So I felt comfortable putting them in that tier. And then Minnesota, they've got 6 losses now, but they've got some really good wins. And I feel like they're a team that's gotten better. Taking Purdue to double overtime on the road suggests to me that they're going to be competitive in most games. So I wouldn't feel confident in saying that Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Illinois make the tournament, any of those 3 teams, but I feel like at least one of them will, if that makes any sense. One of those 3 teams I feel like is going to find a way to get in, and I have a hard time differentiating any of them. And I just felt like that group is a kind of a cut above the next tier, and unless we want to break this down into 6 tiers, I felt like that was the most appropriate.
I know to put them in. It's hard to separate those. I'm actually pretty compelled by your argument. You look at Minnesota. Do you realize Daniel Oturu is number 10 in the KenPom Player of the Year rankings right now?
He's good. He's really good.
I guess I didn't realize how good of a season he's having. Marcus Carr, playing 90% of the minutes for them at guard. So they're. I may be underrating Minnesota a little bit. And I think you make a good point about Illinois. They have the pieces to be good, with Frazier and DeSumo. They've got big guys. But, we haven't seen it under this coach, under Brad Underwood, to see if it can all come together. But they're undoubtedly going to, probably pull off an upset against Minnesota or Ohio State at some point. They're going to beat some good teams. They just feel like a team that could also lose on any night. So that's.
Their problem with them getting into the tournament right now is, they're 1-5 against top 100 teams in KenPom. They've beaten Michigan, but you look at the rest of their schedule, who they've beaten. Their best win besides Michigan is Hawaii. So they're really going to have a great Big Ten season to even kind of get in the conversation. I feel like they've already taken 5 losses, so I think they would have to at least get to 500, if not better, in the Big Ten to get in the conversation. Same thing with Wisconsin. They took those 3. I think it was 3 losses going into the IU game, 3 straight that they took. They were all kind of teams that were. Besides, Richmond and New Mexico, they lost to both of those teams on a neutral court. Then they lost at NC State. They don't really have a bad loss, but they don't really have enough really good wins at this point to keep them kind of on the right side of the bubble at this point. But I feel like all 3 of those teams are solid teams, and I feel comfortable putting them above Rutgers, Nebraska, and Northwestern at this point.
I agree with Rutgers. I think clearly better than those other 2 teams. I mean, I think you could make a case that Rutgers jumps up into this tier, but I think they would definitely be at the bottom of it.
For sure.
So, by the way, did you, on the Moving Screen podcast, when Brendan and Dylan were doing their Big Ten power rankings, did you hear Brendan describe Indiana as Rutgers with talent based on the way that they're trying to play this year?
I saw your tweet. I haven't had a chance to listen to their show yet. This week I'll do that soon, but yeah, I mean that's
okay. But how does that strike you? Because he said it, and I immediately wanted to say. And by the way, he picked Indiana 7th. So
that's where I have
he's
him.
Not he's not down
right
on Indiana, but that was just how he described watching them play. Which
I mean, I wish Indiana was playing defense like Rutgers is right now. Rutgers is the 27th best defense in the country, so that would actually be kind of a bit of a mischaracterization of Indiana's defense to call them as good as Rutgers right now, because Rutgers is better on the defensive end. My problem with
I think he was even talking more about offensively, just trying to be a team that's kind of rugged and inside. And
yeah, I mean, look at their 3-point shooting, 28.6% for Rutgers. There's a lot of Big Ten teams that can't shoot from the perimeter. Maryland's one of them. We're going to see tomorrow potentially a ton of bricks going up in the Xfinity Center. But yeah, Rutgers, to me, I think right now I think they will have had a good season this year if they make the NIT. Is that
sure? Absolutely. Yeah. That would be a tremendous achievement for Steve Peichel. Rutgers is 48th in KenPom right now. Rutgers is not a game that you just look at as, hey, this is a breather. I mean, you're going to be in for a fight against Rutgers. Think about how far that's come in just a couple of years. I mean, they're not great. And it's still a game that you should win, but they're tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of Indiana's more winnable road Big Ten games this year. You look at, that's the scary thing when you kind of get into the weeds of this Big Ten schedule for Indiana. They don't have the luxury this year, and normally you wouldn't call it a luxury based on their past performances there. They don't have the luxury of going to Northwestern this year. And so you look at the most winnable road Big Ten games. It's Rutgers, Illinois, Nebraska, and Minnesota. They got to figure out a way to get 2 of those if they want to kind of reach their goals for the season. But yeah, Rutgers they're a program on the rise. Hats off to what they've been able to do there. They've become a respectable team. It just kind of shows you though how difficult it is to kind of break out of the bottom of the league. They've been, since they've gotten into the Big Ten, I think played on Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament every year since it's been expanded, and they could still be a pretty good team this year and finish 11th or 12th in the Big Ten. That's how difficult this league is this year.
What are you doing with Purdue right now? I mean, I know they're in this tier, but how do you see this going for them? Because they're still, as they almost always do, they're hanging on to that KenPom ranking of 13th despite taking 5 losses. They just beat Minnesota.
Yeah, I think we learned.
Nice.
I mean, they've got a brutal stretch here coming up. They're next. Let's see.
I feel like you could say that about every Big Ten team.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to learn a lot more about them though. They're what, 9-5 right now. They almost lost to Minnesota at home, which they ultimately got the win. But they go to Illinois on Sunday. That, to me, that's a game Illinois has to win. Then they go to Michigan, host Michigan State, and they go to Maryland. They could very easily lose all 4 of those games. I feel like that's
sure they could.
I mean, the Illinois and the Michigan State games are 50-50 in KenPom basically, and the Michigan and Maryland road games are 37% chance and 35% chance respectively. So that, to me, is going to tell us a ton about Purdue. if they win 2 of those games, I'm going to be a lot higher on them. If they only win 1 or 0, then I don't know that I necessarily feel great about them making the tournament at that point.
It's interesting. I didn't realize some of these stats. Eric Hunter, in his sophomore year, currently shooting 42.6% from 3 on 54 attempts. Sasha Stefanovic, his sophomore year, shooting 45.3% from three-point range. Obviously, both of those guys from the state of Indiana. Do you think Indiana did not offer either one of those guys? Is that correct?
Definitely didn't offer. They recruited the wrong guy off the Crown Point team because they recruited Grant Gilon, and Sasha Stefanovic was on that team, and I'm pretty sure that Tom Crean didn't even look at him. I remember getting emails back in that time period from people saying Indiana recruited the wrong guy off of this Crown Point team. And I would look at the box scores, and it would be Grant Gilon would have like 6 points in a game, and Stefanovic would have like 25, and I'm like, what's going on here? So yeah, they definitely didn't offer him. Eric Hunter they looked at, but I don't think they offered. Which, I mean, they had their sights set firmly on obviously Romeo and Rob Finney. It's hard to kind of, in hindsight, blame them for that. But Eric Hunter
tough to see him there shooting 40+% from 3 when they were in their own backyard. But
very good scorer. Played at a smaller school in Indianapolis, but I think it was pretty high up on the state scoring list when it was all said and done. Really good kid. I had questions about just how his strength and athleticism would translate to this level, but give him credit, he's been really good so far this year.
So it's virtually impossible to try to separate some of these teams in this big tier right here. But, as you look at Indiana, like if I just throw out another team, what's your visceral reaction to if Indiana is better, will finish better than that team? Illinois.
Better. Indiana better.
Minnesota.
I'd say Indiana will finish better than them.
Rutgers.
Indiana will finish better than them.
Wisconsin.
I think they'll finish better than them.
Wow. Okay. So that's.
I have them 7th right now. I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not overreacting to the Arkansas loss. I'm not going to overreact to the Maryland game because I don't think they're going to win at Maryland. I'm most interested, to be honest with you. I think obviously they've got to beat Northwestern at home, and we'll see what happens with the Ohio State game. I'm most interested in really seeing what happens that next week when they go to Rutgers and Nebraska. I think that's going to kind of be telling in terms of, because they lose those games and then all of a sudden you're like, where are the wins coming from? They're going to have to me, I think they need to get 9, maybe 10 Big Ten wins to feel pretty good about their tournament chances.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to pick up a road win or two somewhere to make that happen. And if
you get that amount, you're going to get some quad 1 and 2 wins. Like, it's impossible to win that many games in the conference and not pick up some quality victories.
For sure. But they're going to have to do some work on the road somewhere. And you can't trust them. Clearly, you can't trust them after the Arkansas game to hold serve at home against everybody in this league. I mean, I think they're going to beat some really good teams at Assembly Hall, but I don't necessarily think that they're going to be able to win more than 7 or 8 Big Ten home games. I mean, there's going to be teams that come in and win. I mean, obviously they could prove me wrong, but I think what we've seen, I want to say Dylan had this stat in his story that he published today, but Archie's 12-8, I think, in Big Ten home games over his first 2 years. So,
yeah, I mean, we dominated.
Winning 7 or 8 Big Ten home games would be a change from what's been the norm in the first 2 years.
I mean, we dominated the conference at home in 2016, which powered Indiana to that Big Ten title. But since then,
right,
the Hoosiers have been leaky, and I mean, this happened the last year of Crean, and it's happened under Archie, capable of just some virtual no-shows at home, and some really bad performances. So, but that you're not going to be able to do that this year in Big Ten play.
I've got a funny story from the aftermath of the Arkansas game. there was a couple reporters from Arkansas who were at the game, and I went over. Dylan and Cam weren't there, but so I asked one of the IDS students to turn my camera on for the Indiana press conferences because I wanted to go over to Arkansas to get the Musselman reaction. I wanted to just kind of ask him a question about the second half and how they were able to take Trace Jackson Davis out of the game, and he was really good. I'm glad I did go over there. But before he came into the media room, a couple Arkansas reporters were standing there and they were kind of flipping through the media guide and trying to come up with what this was their best non-conference road win since, and they were like going back to like the late 90s and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, do these guys realize that 2 or 3 years ago Fort Wayne and Indiana State came in and won here? This is like it kind of gives you, like, for those of us who are with this every day and follow it, and you know, we all realize kind of how far Indiana has to go to get back, but around the country, people who aren't around this program, they still view it as these guys were calling Indiana blue blood. This was a great win. And don't get me wrong, it was a good win. It was, something that Arkansas should feel good about. But it kind of gives you pause when, that we've seen some of the things we've seen over these last, over this last decade, how tough of and a trying time it's been. Kind of the disconnect between how we view it and how it's still viewed from the outside. I guess that's kind of what
how it should be.
Still a great job, and still a great place for Archie. That's a reason they were able to attract a young up and coming coach like Archie Miller, because it's still Indiana. But wow, I was just like, if this is really their best non-conference road win in 20 years, then.
Just shows you the stature that Assembly Hall has and that the program has, nationwide.
Right.
Now we just need to live up to it. So the last topic I want to hit here, as we look at what Indiana needs to do in Big Ten play, and I think you outlined at the beginning of this, why there's every good reason to look at this as glass half full right now. And I think that's a good mindset to take into this. But this is also the reality of Indiana's last 5 games. I guess let's go back 6 games, because they beat Florida State, and that was a terrific win. It really showed what this team can be when Assembly Hall is rocking, and you got the Devontae Green, that you can have, and you're playing locked in defense. Like, that was a terrific performance. There's no reason to think that Indiana can't deliver that 3, 4, 5 more times at home in Big Ten play. And Florida State, still 20th in Ken Pom. I mean, they're a good team, and that's how you're going to need to play to beat a Purdue, to beat a Maryland at home, those types of teams. I think Indiana is going to be capable of that. But if you look at the last 5 games, so Indiana obviously got trounced on the road by Wisconsin, who's ranked 29th in Ken Pom. And I use these rankings not because, this is the set, like where this team is going to be at the end of the year, but it's just going to kind of give you an understanding of what Indiana has done against where this competition stacks up right now. Then they lost at home to Arkansas, which we talked about. Their 3 wins during this time period were that neutral court victory over Connecticut, home overtime against Nebraska, neutral court against Notre Dame. Those 3 teams in Ken Pom are 58th, 136th, and 67th. And I think, is it fair to say, Alex, as you reflect on those games, that watching it, all 3 of those matchups, like if you just took away the numbers and took away the expectations, it looked like matchups against pretty evenly matched teams, right? Like Indiana wasn't like clearly better and just maybe playing down to their, down a level. Like, I think we expect more from Indiana, but for those 120 minutes of basketball, they looked a lot like the teams they were playing. Again, 58th, 67th, and 136th. When you look at the rest of the schedule now in Big Ten play for Indiana, there are only 2 games on the schedule against Northwestern and Nebraska where you're facing a team that is worse than currently 47th, or 48th, which is where Rutgers is. So the reality, and I think everybody knows this, is Indiana's going to have, even though they're 3-1 in their last 4 games, if you just take those performances into Big Ten play, you're going to win 4, 5, 6 games. That's it. Like, Indiana has to get better against the better competition that they're going to play night in, night out in Big Ten play. And I think some of that's got to come from health. Some of that has to come from upperclassmen just playing more consistently. And some of that's going to have to come from maybe a guy like Jerome Hunter emerging, or a guy like Race Thompson emerging, to where you're not getting a lot of production from him now, but they can change the equation because of how they develop over the season. So I continue to be optimistic. I think this team will continue to improve, but they have really got to play better basketball now moving forward. Even though they've won 3 out of these last 4, a lot of those performances would not be good enough against the majority of Big Ten teams to win.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything you said there. The interesting part is how those 8 minutes against Arkansas changed this conversation so drastically, because if Indiana doesn't collapse, then we're talking about a team that's 4-0 over its last 4, and we're not thinking about all these problems. And that's, to me,
yes and no. Yes and no, because I think that doesn't, because we even talked about those performances against Connecticut, Nebraska, and Notre Dame, and that Arkansas game. That's a home game. Look, I think losing that game definitely changed the tenor of it. There's no question about it. But some of those other issues would still be there. It accentuates it that they just collapsed at the end of that Arkansas game.
But do you think the Arkansas matchup is really something that can be a foreshadowing into what to expect against other Big Ten teams? Just because the style of play that they brought was so unique in terms of playing small ball, wasting a lot of threes, and just the way that they played. I don't know.
The style of play, Arkansas style of play, doesn't worry me, because I don't think we're going to see another team like that. The issue is, the reasons for why that happened felt so familiar to the last couple of years, where the offense just felt clueless and rudderless in a really important part of the game. And yeah, the matchup was different, but the mentality that you saw and the inability to adjust to it was similar. That to me is where the concern comes in.
Yeah, and I think that my biggest concern is just where the leadership from the upperclassmen on this team is going to come from. I think the most disappointing thing about the Arkansas game and this last, even going back to the Wisconsin game, it's really why I'm curious to see how Indiana plays tomorrow. I don't expect them to win, but they need to be competitive and in the game. I think if you have good leaders, you don't go on the road and get down 31 to Wisconsin. I think if you have good leaders, you don't blow a 11-point second half lead at home to Arkansas. And so it calls into question for me, Al Durham, the play he made. Whether or not it's uncharacteristic of him as a person is irrelevant. He still made the play and could have cost his team the game because he wasn't in there. Devontae Green, for as good as he was early in the second half, he did a lot. He reverted back to some terrible habits late in the game and really cost his team the game. Deron Davis's body language on the bench, to me, against Arkansas wasn't great. He wasn't standing up and clapping at all times. He didn't seem like a guy that was engaged. Justin Smith, he's hit or miss. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get from him. And I think if you want to look at why Indiana's not kind of progressed to where people thought they should be at this time in year 3 of Archie Miller's tenure, I think you got to start with those 4 guys and say, what are these guys bringing on a consistent basis? And I don't think any of them right now can objectively, you can't look at any of them and say that Indiana's getting consistent good play from any of them, and they're not getting consistent leadership from any of them, because if they were, they wouldn't have performances like the Wisconsin and Arkansas game. And that, to me, is what's got to change more than anything else.
Well said.
And I don't mean to pick on those 4 guys. It's just reality. I mean,
not picking on them. They're upperclassmen. I mean,
the best
expected.
Teams in college basketball either have elite talent or they have old guys that are producing consistently. I mean, Trace Jackson Davis can't be expected to go out and get a double-double every game, but Devontae Green should be able to be counted on not to throw the ball away the last 8 minutes in a home game. And Al Durham, regardless of, like I said, I don't want to make this about Al Durham making one mistake, because that's what it was, but that can't happen. I mean, that can't happen. People were looking at, Armand Franklin played terribly down the stretch against Arkansas. Well, Armand Franklin realistically shouldn't have been out there. It should have been Al Durham, but he was in the locker room because he made a selfish play. So it's on the upperclassmen to get this turned around and fixed. And if they don't, then we'll see a 7 or 8, 7-win Big Ten team and another trip to the NIT. And if they figure it out, I think Indiana's going to win 9 or 10 Big Ten games and get back to the tournament. So that's kind of where we are at this point.
I will end with this stat. You talked about Trace Jackson Davis and how you can't expect him to go out and get a double-double. Right now, that's a really big part of the formula for winning, so you kind of have to expect that.
Right.
Although, granted, his numbers.
He's got to have some help, though.
Yeah, I mean, his numbers against Connecticut and what were the two games where he was in single digits? Connecticut and Wisconsin. So, yeah, well, no one played well against Wisconsin. Indiana was still able to beat Connecticut without him having a great game, but it's been, he's been the anchor. So here's an interesting stat for you. Do you know how many times last year Romeo was named KenPom game MVP in a game, which means for both teams, who was the best player analytically in the game?
Maybe 3 or 4 total.
5. You know how many times Trace has gotten it in 13 games this year?
6,
which is incredible, absolutely incredible. He's been fantastic. He's been just unreal for a freshman and just fantastic in general. So hopefully that continues and some other guys continue to improve and play up to expectations around him. If so, Indiana's put itself in a really good position to be able to win enough games to get back to the NCAA tournament. But if not, the schedule is unforgiving. So we will see. Look forward to seeing it all start on Saturday. We'll be there with the postgame show and the assembly call after that. And then, of course, check out all of the postgame content at InsideTheHall.com. And hopefully we're talking about a win. And we'll talk to you guys next week.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.